Hey, welcome to School Night TV, and this episode's going to be a little more reverent than usual. Actually, a lot more reverent, quite a bit more reverent, because it deals with something that's very personal, and that's the Olympia cat killer. And you may have heard about it. It's hit national news, which is sort of strange because what's considered sort of the epicenter has been my neighborhood, the southwest neighborhood of Olympia. And the southwest neighborhood, it's strictly residential. There's no real reason to come into this neighborhood unless you're visiting one of the houses here. It's very quiet, especially at night. It's a very nice place to walk at night, actually. It's a very peaceful little neighborhood. You can practically walk down the middle of the street and not have to deal with cars or really any sort of trouble. But this person has killed at least 3 cats in the southwest neighborhood. And the news articles say that the Olympia cat killer has killed 7 total, including 1 cat in Port Angeles. But I've actually heard of an 8th cat. And, with any of this sort of stuff, when there's crimes going on, I'm very averse to gossip and rumor because there's just something about the most serious situations that sometimes produces the most rumors and the most gossip. But I have from a pretty reliable source that there's actually an 8th cat who was killed, in addition to the 2 other cats killed last weekend. And excuse me. The 8th cat was not in the southwest neighborhood. I'm told it was another neighborhood. But either way, 7 or 8 confirmed cats have been killed by this person, and it's been quite vicious, where the cats have been strangled, I believe, in at least some of the cases, and then cut open from groin to sternum and had their spines removed, and then the cats have been left either on the owner's property or on a neighboring lawn. And there's not much to say about that. I think it kind of speaks for itself, where this person is not just committing a vicious act toward an animal, a very violent, sadistic act toward the animal, but there's clearly a level of sadism that's aimed at the pet owners as well. It's not Jeffrey Dahmer messing around with roadkill in his shed. This is somebody who's very aggressive in how they're doing this and how they're handling the cats. Beyond the act of actually killing the cat, there's an extra layer to the way that they're presenting it, to try to hurt the owner, to hurt everybody, really, because I think it really does hurt everybody. And I think I was a little concerned that the police wouldn't be taking this seriously, because there is that attitude where it's like, oh, it's just cats, whatever. But I think everybody pretty much universally recognizes that this person is a problem. This person is a problem for everybody. And I'm, of course, an animal person. My cat, she lives indoors. But even then, that doesn't give me any security, really. Sure, I'm glad that my cat isn't outside in this neighborhood where this person has been stalking the night, killing cats. But on the other hand, when you're in your house, you feel this false sense of security when really there's just this wall between you and that person who's been out there. For all I know, they've been down my little dead-end street. That's something I want to say, too, about when something like this is going on, is that I've walked down some of the streets that I've walked down a million times in the 7 years I've lived in the southwest neighborhood. But with this going on, it shifts your perspective. Things are a little more surreal because you're walking down the street thinking that same person, that sadist, that this person who has done this horrible thing, this horrible series of acts, has walked down these exact streets and seen these streets with their own eyes. And it shifts your perspective in a strange way that's hard to really put into words. I would say it's almost like having a spell put upon you. And I've seen some cats out and about. There's one house in particular, this very rundown house that has a lot of cats that over the years seem starved literally for food and also starved for attention, and they're always hanging around out front. And walking by that house, of course, those people haven't locked their cats up, and there's nothing that you can really do. I mean, you can't force people to lock their cats up, even when there's a cat killer around. But seeing those cats out and about, and I'm like, those cats are just sitting there, starved for attention, starved for food, just laying in wait, really, while this horrible person is out and about. But they've also hit some other neighborhoods too, both in the Olympia area, as well as one outlier in Port Angeles, I believe it is. Um, but yeah, it's that there's that shift in perspective where even in your own neighborhood, you start seeing things differently, and you certainly start seeing people differently. And I'm someone who's walked around these neighborhoods a lot at night over the years. I've, especially when I was drinking, coming home from the bars, zigzagging through the neighborhoods. But I wouldn't blame somebody. I don't really walk late at night anymore, but I do walk in the evening. But I wouldn't blame anybody for staring me down or asking me questions because um, we are in a paranoid state because of this going on, and of course, it shows a lot about how people feel. Because certain people have reacted to this Olympia cat killer by saying they could be killing humans next, better watch out, they might start killing humans. And of course, that didn't even really cross my mind when I first started hearing it, or when I first heard about the killer. Um, Although I mean, I certainly hope they don't start killing humans. It'd be awful. It would add a whole new layer of horror to this. But at the same time, just the fact that they are going out harming animals, I value the lives of animals. And the fact that this person is out killing cats, which has always been, my favorite animal. I've always had cats since I was a little kid, and they just bring a certain level of comfort. Uh, both within my own home and even outside of my home. Because I think one of the joys of going out and walking the streets, especially on a nice summer evening, is that you'll run into cats. And there's just a very special feeling about making friends with a strange cat when you're out and about. Especially if the cat's a little bit reluctant, and then you gain that cat's trust, and it lets you scratch its belly or scratch its under its chin. There's just something so satisfying about earning a cat's trust. So the idea of somebody, whether they're earning a cat's trust or just grabbing them by force, the idea of somebody doing that is bad enough on its own. The actual act alone is bad, but the other thing that's just so sad about something like this is that I don't feel comfortable approaching cats. Like, I mean, I'm worried. Like, if I see a cat out and about, especially in this neighborhood where several of these crimes have happened, I'm worried for that cat. I'm like, why is that cat outside? Doesn't the owner know what's been going on? I don't care how much that cat bitches about wanting to go outside. And we all know how awful that is. We all know how annoying a cat is who wants to go outside and when you're not letting it. We know how obnoxious that can be. But still, better to deal with some obnoxious behavior from a living cat than to have your cat go outside and be mutilated. So when I see a cat out and about right now, I'm just like, fuck, somebody get that cat inside. And it's not like you can report somebody for animal cruelty because they're not keeping their cat inside. But it's just one of those things. But the really sad thing for me personally is that I don't want to approach any cats I do see right now because I don't want to make the owners or neighbors uncomfortable. As a lone guy, I'm very well aware of what my presence represents. It's the same thing for, if I'm walking a trail and there's a lone woman up ahead. I'm very aware of what I represent, which is the worst thing in the world. I'm a man, and and I'm not a self-hating man. I don't play any of those weird identity games, and I don't I don't hate on my own masculinity, but I'm very well aware of what I represent in certain situations. And say I'm on a trail and there's a lone woman walking up ahead. We're alone in the woods. I basically represent the boogeyman. Of course, I'm not the boogeyman, and that woman has nothing to fear from me, but she doesn't know that. And there's nothing I can do in that situation to stop her from seeing me as a potential boogeyman. So what can I do? Not be the boogeyman. But unfortunately, even being friendly, like you can't even say hi. You have to be careful. Even doing anything to engage somebody when you're in that situation. If you're alone in the woods, is potentially threatening. And unfortunately, in this case with the cats, I know that I'm not going to hurt a cat. I'm going to kneel down and I just want to scratch the cat's chin. But people might see that and think like that guy could potentially be the cat killer. And so as a result, if I'm walking around at night right now, I don't feel that I can approach cats. And that's just sad because it's one of those little joys in life is to be able to approach a cat and just pet it. The fact that I can't go out and pet a cat just sucks. It's just fucking sad. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't really hear about. You don't think about when you hear that somebody's out mutilating cats. You don't think about those little things, the impact that it has beyond the horror of a pet owner looking outside, beyond the horror of like what that cat had to experience in its final moments, and beyond the pet owner having to go not just with the loss of a pet, because if you've lost pets, I had a cat, my cat Dion, when I was in high school. I had her since she was a kitten, since I was in elementary school, and we moved to a new house when I was in high school. It had a woods behind it. There were coyotes, there were all kinds of things, and Dion was an outdoor cat, and she went missing. She never came back, and just having a cat go missing is hard enough. Having a cat die of natural causes, that's hard enough. Just the normal, natural things that can happen to a pet are hard enough. So for somebody to have to wake up and to see their pet mutilated, this is a difficult episode for me because I don't want to be thinking about this, but it's hard not to because I've been pretty much obsessed with it since I heard about it last weekend. And like for that person to go out and to see their cat on display and to know that somebody didn't hit them with their car, a coyote or raccoon didn't get to the cat, that some very, very twisted person decided to act this weird, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't even know how to describe that behavior, to be honest. I mean, it's sadism, but that someone deliberately did that to a creature that you loved. All of that, just my point being, all of that, what happened to the cat, what the family that owns it, what the owner is going through, that's one thing. But just on a communal level, the fact that I don't feel comfortable even approaching a cat is just sad. That's just one of those small, sad things that it's like I don't feel like I can pet neighbors' cats because I might look like a threat because, we all know this is a man. We all know, or a boy or something. We all know it's I mean, if it is a girl, it's going to be such an exception to the rule that, it's not even worth considering. If it is a woman doing this, it's going to be such an exception that, it's not like it proves anything wrong. It's like we can pretty well guess that this is a guy out there doing this, and that guy is the boogeyman. That person has become the boogeyman. They not only represent the boogeyman, they are committing the acts of a boogeyman. And in my position, it's like I can't go out at night without potentially being the boogeyman. I was actually walking by the house where one of the killings happened, and it hits close to home, actually. It really does, because someone I used to date who's still a friend of mine, she lives just a few blocks away, and her neighbors adopted her dog a little while back. So they're these very kind animal people, and they have other animals as well. And they were taking care of this cat they rescued, a deaf cat, and he lived on their porch. And that cat fell prey to this cat killer. So this family who was very close to a family that I know very well, someone I used to date, someone who I still value as a friend, and they killed that person's, a deaf cat that those people took care of. And it's one of those things that adds a whole other layer to it. Killing a deaf cat, mutilating a deaf cat. It's just, to be that person. I don't want to think of the world through their eyes, but unfortunately, that's always been one of my interests in true crime, is just trying to understand, as someone who's very squeamish, and some of the blood and guts of true crime, I don't need to go there. That's the material side of it, but trying to understand the psychology of it and what's going through someone's brain. And I've talked before, I'm sure, on this show about, as someone who throughout my entire life has been very interested in true crime, how I've kind of grown some natural distance from it. I spent so many years really studying it. It certainly wasn't entertainment to me. I didn't find, although, getting scared, giving yourself the chills, there is an entertainment aspect to it, but not pleasurable entertainment. Anytime I read about a serial killer, watched a documentary, studied a case, I never felt any of that sort of pleasure entertainment. Although, admittedly, sometimes when you get that scared feeling, especially, for me, like I'm not a horror movie fan. Probably in the same sense that I'm kind of squeamish. And so I haven't watched a lot of horror movies, but like when a horror movie does give you a really good psychological scare, when it really just creeps into your brain and gets you, I have gotten that sort of sensation from reading about true crime. So there is a sort of like creepy, scary entertainment value, if you even want to call it that. But over time, it's like even that has kind of become foreign to me. Because I feel like I kind of exhausted that subject. I feel like, it's everywhere now, too. And that's the thing. True crime is truly everywhere. I feel like you can't walk by a television set without some sort of documentary on about even just a one-off, like some guy killed his wife. I mean, I feel like that makes up like 70% of TV these days, really. I mean, that's just a number I'm throwing out there, 70%. But in the same way that people used to joke about how the History Channel was becoming the Hitler Channel because all it talked about, every show was about Hitler or Nazis, I feel like TV in general, especially certain networks, really just, they're all about these cold cases or these unsolved crimes, or like, I think it was the brother-in-law. No, maybe it was the mother-in-law. Every show feels like it's like that these days. And there are actually there are a lot of podcasts. I never really got into the true crime podcast circuit, but a couple of my closest friends listen to a lot of that stuff. And my buddy actually told me that the Olympia cat killer was mentioned on a very popular true crime podcast, which is sort of crazy. It's crazy that it's such national news. Because like I said, these are streets that I've walked a million times, and it's a very quiet, really overall pleasant neighborhood. Aside from, the drug addicts, like going from the woods and to the shopping areas and back and forth, it's a very pleasant neighborhood. And it's weird when something kind of casts a spell over it. And I actually talked to my friend Miles on the phone last night. And the first thing he said was like, so do you feel like some sort of black magic has overtaken Olympia? And he was kidding, it's a joke. He said it with a, I could hear the smile in his voice, or see the smile on his face, rather. But one of the reasons he said that, too, is that yesterday morning a woman was found dead in West Olympia, and it was the northwest neighborhood, but that really just means 2 blocks away from the southwest neighborhood where I live, just across a main street. It's a very small area. And that's sort of a weird situation because she was found dead on the street at 7 a.m. by a street sweeper. And the article about it didn't mention anything about a potential homicide. I mean, there was something at the bottom that was like, if you know anything about this, here's a phone number. But they talked to her family members, I believe her niece, who said that the family was wanting questions answered because this woman was badly bruised and injured. And it basically implied she looked like she had been beaten. And you'd think if a woman was found beaten to death in Olympia at all, let alone on the west side where, let's say, a concentration of these cat killings has happened, you feel like they would have said something, hey, maybe people have reason to be worried. We want come forward, somebody come forward. I don't know. I'm losing my words here, but You'd think this would have like produced more of a reaction in the local paper and just within the community. But that said, it's like the family said there was bruising and she looked injured and she was found on the street. And if you fall down on a sidewalk hard enough, I mean, you'll look like you got beat up. If you hit your head on a curb, you will look like somebody hurt you. I mean, I even know before I quit drinking, in the months leading up to quitting drinking, I had a really bad fall one night coming home from the bar. One of those events that certainly led to me quitting drinking, among other events and just different things. And I still have the scar. It's probably noticeable even on this webcam. And I had some other wounds all along my left side. Thank God I didn't hit my head, but I fell very hard during a blackout. And I woke up the next morning and my bed was covered in blood. And this wound in particular was so deep. I mean, I don't know that I could see the bone, but it was one of those sort of wounds that you hear about where you're like, I could see the bone, through this scrape. It definitely got through as many layers of skin as it could. And I could see all sorts of weird colors in there. And it took a very long time to heal. And I mean, I feel stupid going on and on about a drunk injury here when I'm talking about much more horrible things like a woman dying, like cats being mutilated. But my point is that was a very bad wound, and it was just from falling onto the sidewalk onto my side. And, if someone falls, they hit their head, they hit their shoulder, there's going to be severe bruising. And if they hit their face, it's going to look like somebody might have beaten them up. So maybe there's indications that this woman simply fell. I don't know. An African-American woman, I believe in her 50s, lived in some apartments a few blocks away from where she was found. And of course, there's a whole argument to be made there where, there is a tendency to minimize, when people from marginalized groups die or something happens to them or they go missing. There's kind of that stereotype where if it's a young blonde white girl, if it's Natalie Holloway, if you remember that case, as you probably will if you're more over a certain age, if you're over the age of 25, I have to imagine that name brings an immediate picture to mind because there was this huge deal made out of the Natalie Holloway disappearance in Aruba years ago. Meanwhile, young black women from the ghetto go missing or get killed under mysterious circumstances, and there's no press. They're barely a footnote. And I don't play the identity games. I don't really play the games with identity politics, but I think it's easy to see that phenomena happen in the press. It's easy to see that happen even with just people and it's very true. So my mind did naturally think, because this is a black woman who was found on the street, is this being downplayed for that reason, or do the cops just know more? Do they have more circumstantial evidence that points to this not being a homicide? I don't know. But just the timing is fucked up at the very least. So I told my friend about that, and he was very well aware of the whole cat killing thing. So he's like, is there some black magic going on in Olympia or what? And then, to make matters worse, last night I got a message from my mom, and she's like, a guy just hijacked an Alaska Airlines plane from Sea-Tac airport and crashed it. A suicidal 29-year-old airplane mechanic hijacked an airplane and crashed it. And fortunately, there was nobody on the plane, but he crashed it into a small island north of here. About a half hour, 45 minutes, I would guess. So not terribly far. It's in the next county, but it's all along I-5. It's all in this Puget Sound area. And of course, that set this little island on fire. I'd never actually heard of this little island. It's very small, but it set this island on fire. Because, you hear, oh, he was all alone in the airplane and he just killed himself. But it's like, then he started a big fucking fire. He might have just ruined this little island, and that going on, it's like, man, not a lot happens in this area. The Pacific Northwest and specifically Washington is a very safe place. When you compare it to other parts of the world, certainly the world, but even the country, even the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest is very safe. And despite all the hype about like serial killers coming from here and just some dark psychological stuff, a lot of depression. You think about the rainy, dark weather. You think about, some of the music. Everyone thinks of grunge as this sort of like depressed thing, and just some different things like that. There are some different stereotypes about the Pacific Northwest that kind of paint it in a dark light. But overall, it's a very peaceful place. I'd say there's less chaos going on in Washington State than there is in many other places. So to have the cat killings and then like this mysterious death, because that's what I should have added that to the whole thing about this woman being found, is that there are very few deaths like that. There are very, very few murders in Olympia. Not that long ago, actually, a guy was shot to death in the transient area near my house. I was talking about how you'll see kind of some drug addicts, transient types going back and forth through my neighborhood. Because basically I live on a dead end, and then the main street, I live on a dead end within another dead end, and at the end of the main street's dead end, there are some railroad tracks down below and quite a bit of forest, and there's this very large camp. It's very elaborate. One time when I first moved here, I wandered down there and of course turned around quickly because it's a very elaborate homeless camp down there, and a guy was shot to death down near there. I want to say within the last 6 months, definitely within the last year. But I believe it may have been within the last 6 to 8 months. But it was over a drug deal. 2 guys shot a guy. So murders and stuff do happen, but it's very rare that it's not directly related to a drug deal or something like that, something like kind of street level. So this woman just being found dead is a complete anomaly, really. And so that combined with everything else going on, and there's just a kind of a psychological darkness in the air right now. Obviously, we live in a very chaotic time. The current political climate is just complete chaos. I think I like that. What's his name? I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I've only read it. I've never actually really heard his name pronounced, but Zbigniew something, some Eastern European name. He was a head of state or a secretary of state. Sue me, for not pulling up Wikipedia. Sue me for not pulling up Wikipedia. But he once said, I love this quote, history is more the product of chaos than conspiracy. And my personal take on that is that conspiracy is often a way to try to control the chaos. But overall, the way that events play out, in my opinion, is far more the result of chaos than conspiracy, as somebody much more famous than me put it, as I quoted. More chaos than conspiracy. But right now, we live in this time where everyone's like kind of trying to focus on these conspiracies. You have like the quote-unquote traditional conspiracy theorists who are grabbing hold of all these big ideas and trying to say that this, and this happened. Don't trust the government. Don't trust this. But right now, I'd say a lot of conspiracy theories have even become very mainstream. You figure the whole Russian thing. Because that's the thing about a conspiracy theory, is just because it's a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not real. A conspiracy... We've gotten this kind of idea, like the way that the term conspiracy theory has entered the mainstream lexicon has kind of made us think of conspiracy theories as these myths or something that couldn't possibly be true. And it's like, a conspiracy theory can be very real or it can be very fake. There's... the term itself doesn't really imply anything one way or another when it comes to truth or lie or anything. But right now we live in this climate where basically everybody is clinging on to conspiracy theories. Like on the left, you have people really just like the Russians. That's all I need to say. I am not going to get into all that. But, you have this whole just the Russians. And on the right, there's just tons of conspiracy theories, like the whole fake news. I mean, it's endless. I could really just keep going on about each group that has a conspiracy theory about this or that or that. But ultimately, there's this climate of chaos that's sort of ruling everything. And I think a lot of people are experiencing more depression, anxiety, possibly other mental deterioration that they otherwise would not have because of this climate, and everything sort of feeds into everything else. And you think about times in the past, you think about the way that the American serial killer sort of developed in the 1960s and 70s, and the climate that was surrounding that. And my friend Jessie, who uh, I've talked to, she actually talked to me about possibly doing a podcast together. It was going to be, it was a great idea she had. It was going to be, she would make a special drink, alcoholic drink for each episode that was sort of themed around the episode, and it would be a true crime podcast. But right around the time she proposed that great idea, I quit drinking, and I kind of just grew apart from true crime. And, it's always, true crime is always a part of my field of knowledge and interest, but it was just I stopped really wanting to delve into that as much. I feel like I'm delving into it here because it's literally going on around me. It's going on in my neighborhood. It's hard not to address it. But unfortunately, she proposed just a really great idea for a podcast right at the time that I was distancing myself from the two of the core themes of the idea. But she pointed something out really interesting to me, which was that you see the American serial killer, like most of the famous, infamous serial killers came about in the 60s and 70s and through the 80s. And if you look at the political and social climate during that time, it was very tumultuous. You had, the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, all kinds of things in between, Watergate. You had these political scandals, these weird, existential wars. Of course, there was a lot more going on in Vietnam and places like that than just existential dilemmas, but still, it's like they created this weird existential feeling that things like World War II didn't have, that World War I didn't have, where people didn't feel good about what our country was doing. And there's just so much going on internally. And then just socially, you think of all the social changes. You think about the changes that were going on in terms of, women's rights, civil rights, just everything. There's just, even though ultimately things moved in a very positive direction, the ups and downs of that created a climate of pure chaos. And from within that, you had these serial killers develop. Basically, all of the most infamous, deadly serial killers came about during those eras. And there's a part of me that worries that we're entering another era of that. And serial killers can't really exist today in the same way they did. There's so much technology, surveillance. I think that the impulse to become a serial killer is still there. That's a dark part of man. In the same way that I was saying, being a man means you represent the boogeyman in a given situation. If I'm a lone man walking a neighborhood where cats have been mutilated and I'm approaching cats just to pet them, in that moment, if someone's looking out their window, I'm the boogeyman. A woman who's jogging through the woods who sees a lone man up ahead, I represent the boogeyman. And I think that there's an element of the boogeyman in every man. And I think, fortunately, for many of us, it never becomes activated. But I think that for some, it unfortunately does, whether that's something that could be controlled through nature or nurture, I don't know. That's really one of the essential questions of true crime. And despite all of the years that I spent just immersed in true crime, trying to make sense of it, trying to make sense of that very dark part of an individual's existence, that just question of why. I was never able to find an answer to that. You can look at different factors, you can look at different situations, and no clear answer ever came out for me. And there's people who have studied this much more in depth, psychologists, scientists, and they haven't found the why either. But I do think there is an overall environmental factor that comes into play. And with this person killing cats, I'm not going to say this person killing cats is doing it because Donald Trump's the president and there's like constant conflict. here and over there, and we have drones flying around in other countries, accidentally, blowing up schools and this and that. And I'm not going to say it's anything that clear cut, or that it's because people are trying to shut down free speech at colleges. It's like there's so many different things going on, and that's what I mean by the chaos. I'm not going to say that kid, that depressed, I don't know if he was a kid. He was 29. I'm 32, so I shouldn't really call him a kid. But a 29-year-old man crashing that plane last night into a small island. What I heard was that he was depressed. I know a lot of depressed people. I know more now than ever. And maybe that's because people are being more open about those sorts of feelings. And maybe it's because the world is just creating more depressed people. I don't really know. But I know a lot of depressed people. I know some people who I even worry about. I know people where I worry about them killing themselves or just burrowing down into a self-destructive hole they can't get out of. I worry about that with people I know, and I've done a lot of work on myself to get out of that hole, to get out of that abyss. It's the abyss. But I don't know anybody who I'm where I worry they're going to hop in a plane and crash into a fucking island. You know what I mean? And I hear about these things, and they're all going on at the same time, so it's sort of overwhelming. And maybe I'm just reaching this conclusion because it is overwhelming to have, in a relatively small, peaceful in the grand scheme of things area, Washington State, the South Sound, Puget Sound, to have these different things going on. Maybe I'm just reaching for straws, I don't know. But I do feel like this climate of chaos, globally, nationally, within each community, within even small social circles, I feel like as above, so below. The popular occult quote. I feel like that's true. What's going on a macro level ends up happening on a micro level. And the more chaos there is above, the more microscopic chaos we see below. And I think this is getting really grandiose, but I almost feel like my own duty is to help find a balance in all of this and bridge gaps and find a way to make that chaos more manageable. And I try to do that in my own life to a degree of success, because I embrace chaos, in art, in philosophy. I embrace, I spent my whole life embracing nihilism, and one of the most profound realizations I've ever had in my life, and I've talked about it on these YouTube shows, I've talked about it on the Every Night's a School Night and Night School podcast, but one of the most profound epiphanies I've ever had was that nihilism doesn't have to be self-destructive and negative. Nihilism can be taking care of yourself, being healthy in the face of meaninglessness. If everything is meaningless and chaos is the true Lord over all of us, then the ultimate, the most beautifully absurd thing you can do is to take care of yourself. It's to lift weights, it's to eat a healthy meal. It's to think positive, and I never thought I'd be someone who would ever say any of that. I never thought that. I always, cynicism was my crutch. Negativity was my crutch. And I still know the road to get back there. When I need to be negative or cynical, I can still do it because I know the road by heart, and that there's no roadblock there. That's the easy thing about negativity, is there's never a roadblock. You can always get there very easily. And it's harder to get to a place where you feel positive or you feel constructive or you feel like things are meaningful and good. But if you work toward that, everything becomes more manageable. So I feel like it's been a goal of mine the last couple of years, as I feel like the chaos has overtaken things. And I do feel like there's a pattern there where we go through periods of chaos, periods of relative stability, relative chaos and relative stability, because I don't think things are purely chaotic right now. I feel like there are structures going on within that. I could keep going on that. I mean, I could really go deep on that, where I feel like, new structures create themselves in the face of chaos, and also old structures reveal themselves once again. That's going to be kind of vague. And I was originally just talking about fucking psychotic shit going on in my neighborhood, but that's where my mind's at. And I feel like one of my central purposes in this time is to use the work I've done to kind of create my own structures and find existing structures in this world of chaos, and maybe help other people, or maybe just somehow help people see those structures. Because, if people are killing cats, and I know those people are just the weirdos, I know those people are the fucking exceptions, but people are killing cats, crashing planes, and even if just people are depressed, even if just people are anxious, I want to do everything I can to be a source of strength and stability in the people whose lives are the people who are a part of my life, and I'm a part of their life, people I don't know, people who are part of the community. I don't want to get too grandiose about it. I don't want to pretend that I'm changing the world, but I do want to be a source of strength and stability anywhere and everywhere that I can.